So lately I've been seeing some complaints on Twitter and some other places that the world of Harry Potter, the books and the films, simply aren't diverse enough. There's this idea that it's all about inclusiveness and the right proportions, and therefore the people in Harry Potter should have been a lot more diverse. I've also heard that there have been complaints about celebrations of Christmas at Hogwarts, which is a Christian celebration, although it is also a legal national holiday in Great Britain. And I can't help but wonder, where in the world is that coming from? To me, instead of including people in exactly the right proportions, I always thought it was more about treating people with kindness and fairness without paying a lot of attention to all that. And yet there are a significant number of people, I don't think it's a majority by any means, but there are people who think that the world of Harry Potter simply isn't diverse enough, that it should have been more diverse. Well, I did a little bit of research and I found that the population of the United Kingdom is overwhelmingly white. It's about 88% white. And to the extent that people identify with a certain religion to any degree, it is also majority Christian in terms of how people self-identify. Christmas is a national holiday that is deeply embedded in British culture and is celebrated throughout the United Kingdom. So at boarding schools, it certainly is plausible and logical that you would have Christmas celebrations. It's a deeply embedded part of British culture, unless it was a specifically Jewish school or a specifically Muslim school. I don't think it likely that at a boarding school such as Hogwarts you would have also had Ramadan or Hanukkah celebrations when the people were overwhelmingly not that. Now, I mentioned that the population of the United Kingdom is overwhelmingly white, and the minority population is between 12 and 13%. There's this idea that some people have that if the population breaks down that way, then everything of importance, student bodies, workforces, and so forth, ought to be 12, 13% minority. Now, that has never made a lot of sense to me. Just because the population of a nation in a certain amount is minority, how does that translate to everything has to work out in those percentages? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. And you also have to remember that much of that minority population is concentrated in the larger cities, that smaller areas, rural areas, are not nearly as diverse. They're more overwhelmingly white. So I think it's more about kindness and fairness without regard to all that, instead of trying to make sure that everyone is represented in the right groups. Now, in Harry Potter, you have a number of black folks. There is Kingsley Shacklebolt, who is a member of the Order of the Phoenix, and also at the very end of the Deathly Hallows becomes interim minister of magic. Maybe some people have a problem with the fact that he didn't become permanent minister of magic, but as he was in with Dumbledore, it's quite likely that he didn't want that job on a permanent basis. Among the student body, you have Angelina Johnson, Dean Thomas, Lee Jordan, and Cho Chang is, of course, Asian. So there you have it. You do have the diversity. And there are also 3 instances of interracial dating, that being Harry and Cho Chang, Ginny and Dean Thomas, and either Fred or George with Angelina Johnson at the Yule Ball. So I think that is very significant, as interracial dating is simply not the preference of most people. So it's quite possible that at a school like Hogwarts you might not have had interracial dating at all. Then there's the other fact that the wizarding community is simply a small subset of the UK population. And because the UK population is 12 to 13% minority, there's no reason to assume that the wizarding community, which is a very special subset of the population, would also be 12 to 13% minority. It's also important to realize that there are other schools in other countries. There is Durmstrang, which may be in Scandinavia, as far as we know. It's not specifically located. We just know that it's in the north. There is the Beauxbatons Academy, which is apparently in France. And if you delve in a little bit further, you find that there is also a School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in Brazil. There is also one in Salem, Massachusetts, United States, some other places. So it's quite likely that people from the Middle East would have gone to other schools, or people from Africa may have gone to other schools, as opposed to Hogwarts. In addition to Hogwarts, they might well have gone to any of the other schools, because I think people had freedom of choice as to which schools they could apply to, and that schools could accept students from basically anywhere. And I'm pretty sure Hogwarts did, and Durmstrang did, and so did the Salem Witches Institute. So it's a small subset of the population, that it doesn't necessarily follow that the wizarding community would be 12 to 13%. As to the Christmas celebrations, I have mentioned that the majority of people in the UK identify as Christian when asked about their religious preference, but Christmas is also a huge national holiday in Great Britain. It is a deeply embedded part of British culture. So it is quite likely that at a boarding school you would have had Christmas celebrations. So I think this idea that there should have been so many Jews, so many Arabs, so many blacks, so many people from India, the Patels, they quite possibly were Indian, and so there were two of them. So you do have diversity at Hogwarts. But because the population of the UK is 12 to 13% minority, it doesn't follow that the student body and faculty of Hogwarts would necessarily follow the same pattern. If you start thinking about it, that's kind of ridiculous. Things don't work out that way without a concentrated effort to make them that way. And is that necessarily a good idea? I don't necessarily think that it is. I think when you need people, either students or employees, you ought to simply go and find the best people, regardless of, race. That a lot of that shouldn't really be paid attention to, that it should be more about getting the right people. So you do have considerable diversity at Hogwarts for a school that size and for a school that was a wizarding school, and I think the complaints are mostly unfounded. There is a lesson in Harry Potter that you treat people with generosity and fairness and kindness without regard to all of that, but it doesn't necessarily follow that you have to have exactly the right percentages. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I would mention another thing too, that the half-bloods who were being persecuted so much, at the half-bloods and the Muggleborns, you put those together, and they were actually the majority. So it was a situation where you had the minority, purebloods, actually persecuting the majority, and that was the big problem. Of course, Muggleborns and half-bloods, most of them would have also agreed that they needed to treat purebloods with fairness and kindness. So I think it's an unfortunate and kind of a ridiculous argument that the world of Harry Potter is not more diverse. It does have considerable diversity. It is not about diversity per se as much as it is simply being fair to people and being kind and treating people right, regardless of all that. It's not really about paying attention to make sure that you have so many Africans, so many Indians, so many whatever. It's not really about that. It's about where people do interface, they treat each other right. So this whole idea that Harry Potter is diverse enough is kind of ridiculous, and I think it misses the point. It's not about including people in certain percentages. It's just that in the people that you do relate to, you treat them with kindness and fairness and generosity. That's what it's really about. So it's really the idea that it isn't diverse enough, the world of Harry Potter, is kind of a stupid argument when you think about it. Have a very good day.